Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, my name is Kate Stricklan. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Application Review at the University of Colorado Boulder. I live in Boulder with my family, which includes a fifth grader and a freshman in high school.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagner Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Friends, when I come to you, I'm usually either an 8 out of 10, a 9 out of 10, or a 10 out of 10 on the happiness-o-meter, the happiness scale. And today I'm a 10 out of 10. So why am I so happy? Well, a lot of you have been reaching out and thanking our interviewees, and that just makes me happy because they take several hours, to do the recordings and the back and forth and testing everything. And just literally before I came on here today, I checked my email and the listener sent a thank you to Daniel Chambliss and copied me on it. And I don't know, it just inspires me. So thank you guys for doing that. Then my health journey's going well. And anytime you're clicking on all cylinders with the health journey, you just got a little extra pep in the step. The challenge is, can you be consistent? Then we're working on something I think you guys are really going to like a lot, especially once we get it, all the kinks worked out. And if you want to know what that is, you got to sign up for YCBK Plus. YCBK Plus goes out on Tuesday, and we're going to announce it in YCBK Plus in October's edition. If you're brand new to our podcast and you don't know what I'm talking about, YCBK Plus is our monthly newsletter where we send out some of the past interviews that people have liked a lot. But what we really do is we share links to some cutting edge college admissions and college topics that we didn't get a chance to do a real deep dive in. Or maybe we did, but we think this is a new angle that you'll really like. And there's a lot going on in higher ed. So there are 11 of those articles in October's edition, and I'll let you know what they are. So Governor Gavin Newsom has signed a law to make direct admission the new law for the Cal State schools in California. Then there's an article on how groups are blasting Trump's plan to expand applicant data information. So really meddling with what colleges submit and what he wants from colleges. In fact, there's a really big Titanic battle going on right now. We haven't fully covered it. Vince and I have a discussion coming up. We're recording in November. It'll air probably November, December at the latest. But right now there's I'll use the word Titanic again, war going on where the Trump administration is trying to make colleges MAGA and trying to use blunt force and a lot of authoritarianism to do it. And, there are consequences if you don't go along, but then you also can lose your soul if you do go along. So it's a real battle. And this gets brought up a little bit on Monday. Andy Strick was up on Thursday. Andy Strick was up on Thursday, and he makes a few comments about it there. But there are a couple articles that address it. There's an article on dual enrollment and AP, and let's take a look at the outcomes. What outcomes are we getting with this dual enrollment AP thing? There's an article it's called The Erosion of Context in Admissions. So we've always said holistic admissions is contextual admissions. Well, Trump administration doesn't like that. So there's a real pushback against contextual or holistic admission. So that's an opinion piece, but it's well worth reading. This is something that is really, really interesting, and you're going to want to pay attention to this. So, friends, this is an article that I want to strongly encourage you to read. So, you know about net price calculators, right? They've been around since 2011 when the Obama administration made them mandatory. Well, the problem with net price calculators is they take 15 to 20 minutes. And a lot of surveys show that less than 1 in 7 people that start them actually finish them. So there needed to be another tool. Well, thankfully, and we've talked about this a lot before on here, Wellesley's economics professor, Philip Levine, he invented something called My Intuition, which is used now by, I don't think it's 100 colleges, but it's a lot. And My Intuition just asks 6 questions. And with these 6 questions, it gives a basic projection. You know, the idea being that if you like what you see after doing the My Intuition projection, then maybe you will go ahead and do the calculator. Or maybe you'll just straight apply. But it's addressing this issue of, is college affordable? And how can I know if it's affordable before I put all this work and time and mental energy and financial energy, maybe visiting for a school that's not affordable? Well, guess what? Philip Levine now has a brand new tool. Literally one question. With one question, it gives you a decent range of what colleges are going to ask you to pay. And so far, 22 colleges have signed up for this. So there's a good article on that. And I have somebody in mind that I want to interview for this. I really need to just have Phil Levine on, to be honest. I haven't reached out to him yet. Maybe I'll do that. But I have someone on the college side that I think would be great to talk to about this brand new tool. And the article features Ronnie Turner, by the way, who we have had on the podcast. It's a really good article. So there's another article, once again, about this compact. So Trump is opening up this compact to all higher ed. And there's an article on how is higher ed going to respond to this compact. And you're going to be hearing a lot in the rest of 2025 and 2026 about this compact. We haven't even discussed it here on this podcast yet, but we need to because it's really important. It's going to really impact higher ed. So then there are a couple sadder articles on the financial consequences of colleges losing all their federal funding. There's one on Carnegie Mellon and their massive layoffs that they're going to have in engineering as a result of their financial shortfall. There's another article on how hard DePaul is being hit by the decrease in international students and how it's impacting their budget. There's an article on Princeton's return to standardized testing. They made their big announcement on the 13th of October. And what's going on with that? Literally now Columbia being the only Ivy League school that is not requiring testing. This is also something Andy and I discussed, by the way. I think it's on Thursday. If it's not on this Thursday, it's the following Thursday. You know, sometimes I record these episodes, and when you break them up, you can't always remember. Was it the first half or the second half? And then there's an article on how this is that Titanic battle, right? So Trump's saying if your colleges don't become more MAGA, I'm cutting off your funding. But then some of the states are saying, well, you know what? If you go along with Trump's compact, then we're cutting off your state funding. So there's an article on Gavin Newsom says he's going to pull all state funding from any California colleges if they sign up with Trump's compact, trying to make colleges more MAGA. So you got that war going on there. So anyway, I think it's a good addition, and we hope you'll sign up. Another reason why I'm feeling a 10 out of 10 on the happiness scale is because some episodes I just like more than others. I'm just being totally honest with you. And the episodes that I tend to like the most are the ones where I feel like we pull off what we're trying to do with your college-bound kid. I mean, our goal is to make college knowledge available to all. You guys know that if you're a regular listener. But what does that really mean? Well, for me, it means if you're a brand new neophyte, if you just came here from another country and you do not understand the U.S. system at all, you can listen to our podcast and follow it. I'll never forget a message from my mom in San Diego who basically described herself that way and found that she wasn't following other podcasts, but she listened and she was able to follow ours and she knew nothing. That meant a lot to me. But the twin goal is the 40 to 50 year vet who's been doing this as a career learns new things from each episode. I mean, I think I'd go down to a 1 out of 10 if I heard feedback and people were saying, I didn't learn a single thing. I listened for an hour. I listened for an hour and a half. I didn't learn a thing. So I think these episodes, probably Mondays especially, because a lot of new stuff gets broken there, but maybe this one as much as well. I think it kind of delivers our goal there. So, you be the judge, but it's got me excited. So what's going to happen in this episode that's got me so excited? Well, first, Kate and Susan continue to discuss insights from the NACAC conference, and then they share more insights about file reading and how colleges read files. And then Hillary and I have our wrap-up episode about the case studies. And what I did is I went through the whole video series, and I pulled out and extracted some key insights that I hope everyone who watched the video or listened doesn't miss. And I just kind of share those tidbits with Hillary, and she provides some commentary. Now, I will say this. If you're one of these people, and it looked like it was around 10%. I was looking at our survey. About 1 in 10 of our listeners who think our podcast is too long, then this episode may not be your cup of tea. I'm reminded, I was having a conversation with a communication specialist at Xavier University in Cincinnati. They're going to be coming on the podcast. So we're just talking a little bit before they come on the podcast. And I was saying, sometimes I wonder, is a podcast too long? And I love what he said. He said, there's no such thing as too long. Look at the most popular podcasts in the country. A lot of them are really long. There's only not good enough. So when someone says too long, to me, that means not good enough. So, but if you're in that camp, you may not like it. But if you're in the camp where sometimes when the podcast stops, you wish it went longer, this is probably going to be your kind of episode. Because normally I would take the content I have with Hillary and divide it into 3 episodes. But I can't stay on case studies forever. We better rename our podcast Case Study something. We've got a lot of content to get to, and I've been doing a lot of interviews I'm excited to get to you. One of them is with Heath Einstein. That will start next week. He does a deep dive on what you need to know about recommendations, what colleges are looking for when it comes to recommendations, how to write great recommendations. So we got to get to that content. So Hillary and I are going for a full 1 hour and 15 minutes today. It'll be the longest Monday episode we ever had. And let's transition now, Kate and Susan, as they discuss key takeaways from the NACAC conference in Columbus and more insights into admissions file reading. Friends, I do need to apologize to you before you hear the recording with Susan and Kate. I did a bonehead move. I forgot to plug in the cord to tap into my Focusrite audio interfaces. That's what gives me good sound quality. So I do apologize for my sound quality. I'll try not to do something so asinine in the future. Listen and enjoy. So we had David Hawkins on to talk about that study on the podcast after last year's NACAC, comparing the student to the parent responses. The one thing, I love that study, and it's great for me to show students, but it varies so much the type of institution. I wish that they could decouple it a little bit more and they had a large enough sample size, because some of the things you look at, like personal qualities, that's clearly holistic admissions, right? And then, there's a lot of schools out there that are just crunching numbers. And for those schools, it's GPA and testing if there's testing in the file. And so it's so different depending on the type of institution that I think sometimes people can make incorrect inferences from that data if they just extrapolate it to all colleges and not look at how the individual colleges evaluate students.
That's very true. Yeah. You need to do your research about how each college on your list is evaluating. Yeah.
Now, I would be remiss, Susan is so humble. She never touts her own horn over here. But I had people at NACAC texting me and saying, I'm trying to get in Susan's session and it's packed. It's packed. So, Susan, you have to tell us about your session and, what you covered and how you felt it went.
Well, thanks for saying that, Mark. I think it was the topic that really struck a nerve. Something that I've been thinking about a lot in working with kids, but also working as an application reader, is this concept of the standard strong student. the standard strong college applicant. These kids that have done everything right. We all know them. We all love them. They are high profile in our schools, well liked, admired. They've got it all. And they're genuine, and they are well liked. They've taken tough courses, gotten good grades. So you end up with applications galore from these wonderful kids who have very high expectations, and their parents have extraordinarily high expectations because they really couldn't have done anything better, except perhaps to have been splitting atoms in their basement biomolecular lab, or what I mean. They're not starring in a TV show, or they don't have a hook, and they may or may not rise to the level of matching an institutional priority in a really compelling way. So there's a glut of these kids, partially due to the grooming of high school students for the college admissions process, even going down to 7th and 8th grade, which we know is where some of it is starting. That there is this kind of grooming process that probably didn't exist. Certainly when I started reading applications, at the beginning of my career. And also there's the grade inflation, where there are just many more students who are at the top, ironically, at the tops of their classes. As rank has been disappearing, which is a good thing, but as rank has disappeared, it's harder in a way for colleges to know where these straight A students actually fall, in the competition in their high school. So there are all sorts of things that contribute to that. And so what we focused on in this session was kind of a thoughtful way of looking at how can school counselors, kids, and college admissions professionals reframe working with these kids, counseling them for college, building their lists, and then evaluating them. So I thought it was very worthwhile. I'm actually writing an article now, so that NACAC is interested in. I'd actually done a blog post on this before, but it was really interesting to hear people's perspective. A lot of frustration. A lot of frustration. Kate, you just said a second ago, it's so important for applicants and families to understand how colleges kind of make admissions decisions. And there's not a lot of transparency on that. And the other problem with that is I don't know about you guys, but I can't get kids to read websites. They're looking at the shortcuts. They are overloaded with this process. They have too many schools on their list, and they're not doing the close look at what do individual colleges say about what they value and what they stand for. That I'm a big believer in that. If students could only read the history, the mission statement, and the strategic plan for a college, they would write completely different supplements, more or less. They would have a much better paradigm in mind for what a college is going to be looking for in their application. But applications have actually, and our Columbia rep said, they've actually been becoming more and more generic rather than less generic, even though Columbia has really tried to help students understand how to write an application that would give the university the information it could use in the student's favor. Mm-hmm. So it really interesting
That's a
stuff.
Super hot topic. There's no question that topic would appeal. So Susan, when you said there's a lot of frustration, I can think of lots of reasons why there would be frustration. There could be frustration on the part of college counselors who are constantly dealing with unrealistic expectations on the part of parents and students. You know, there could also be frustration on the part of schools who, you know, get that backlash when they can't admit kids.
Yeah.
You know, where was the frustration primarily coming from in the room, and what were the sources of that? Was it more on the college side, on the college counseling side? Was it, you know, was people trying to empathize with how applicants and families and mental health and self-esteem and confidence and all that stuff? I mean, this is really complicated.
You know, and counselors really just want some new tools. They need to build their toolkit when it comes to working with this population of kids. And that's what I'm going to kind of try and flesh out. And it's not enough to say for a counselor to say to kids, well, make sure your supplements answer the questions and aren't generic. You know, kids often don't know how to get out of the mindset of the application. The whole point of the application is to impress the reader, instead of flipping that and thinking about, well, what are they looking for? But then how am I going to authentically speak, you know, to who I am, rather than just presenting myself as a resume? So one of the things that I've tried to say to people is, you know, kids have this resume perspective on their applications, meaning the resume is an accounting. You know, it's literally an accounting. This is what I've accomplished. And, you know, for admissions readers, that's only the beginning of the evaluation process. That's are they prepared? And what kind of person have they developed into at this moment in their life? Then the whole rest of the evaluation process is, who are they going to be?
Mm-hmm.
You know, who are they going to be on our campus? And what kind of alumni are they going to be? You know, colleges have to take the long view on this. Certainly it starts with, is the student prepared for our university and also for their particular field of study? That's a given. But that's what, 80% of the applicant pool, I bet. You know, that's what a lot of admissions people say. I mean,
it's true. And this is where the disconnect is. I was talking to a student maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Totally would fit into that category as standard strong. I would say not like standard top of the top strong, but strong, like a 32 ACT 4.0, decent rigor. And I was going through a number of schools, sort of like BC, like BU, a bunch of them. And I was explaining to her and her parents that in regular admission, these are not schools that you can expect to get into.
Right.
And she stopped me. She said, why? She said, I have a 4.0. I have a test score that's like around their average. And, you know, it just really hit me how we have to find better ways of explaining that. And that's just that aspect. Like, you're going much deeper. You're talking about matching values and being your authentic self and not just trying to impress. Like, you're talking that about a whole deeper level. But I've been working with ways in which we can help students have realistic expectations. Now, one thing we've talked about doing in my company is just taking, particularly for the high flyers, 35 ACTs, 15 50s, 4.0s, tons of 5s on APs, just putting together like all of the kids' test scores, say at a place like a Brown, no names, nothing, just 1600 denied, 1590 denied, 1510 admitted, because there's this tendency for people to think, oh, as soon as they start getting these really high scores, they're probably getting in. I've also challenged the colleges. Anytime I go to one of these sessions, Susan, and the colleges say, hey, what can we do? I say, I'd love for you to start like at sharing your acceptance rate for your high flyers so that people can see, oh, I can't expect this, but they don't want to do that because that's going to decrease applicant flow. So they're not incentivized to do that.
Well, and you know, what a lot of families don't really understand is, or if they do, if it's communicated to them, they don't like it, is there's half the admissions process that's really targeted at admitting and enrolling the kids that the university wants to, that needs to have there. And then it's whatever's left over goes to the other kids. And, so by the time, and granted, I started my admissions career at a small liberal arts D3 school, but that had a very aggressive athletic recruiting, music recruiting, national debate team recruiting. We were in admissions accountable to a lot of interested parties within. We had the alumni, we had the faculty children. By the time we read all the applications and basically admitted all those kids, and then we were focusing on, diversity and equity. We were focusing on rural northern New England kids, all the micro populations, Kate, that you
athletes, donors, legacy,
that whole, there weren't, it wasn't like half the freshman class was still yet to be filled. It was less than that.
Well, for our listeners, listen to interview 129, not episode 129. Hillary goes through the process she went through with her own daughter, looking at these schools and say, okay, I got to take off half the males. I got to take off all the, you start going through, there's a certain percentage of internationals. They want 50 states, blah, blah, blah. You start narrowing down and you started realizing like how few spots are there for people like me. I don't know. It's a constant challenge in the counseling room because people have incredibly inflated expectations. As a counselor, we want kids to feel good about who they are. So we're trying to build their esteem up. But it's really hard when people are coming in, with them. Sometimes I'll say this in the counseling room. I say, you might really like basketball, but you probably don't judge yourself as a failure if you don't make the NBA All-Star game. But that's what I feel people are doing, right? Like if I don't get in this school, then I don't see myself as successful. And I'm always trying to get them to recalibrate. But then it's hard from certain communities if they have a limited view of what they consider to be a good school. It's a very, do you encounter this stuff, Kate, on your end? Do you see it at all, or you feel like you're detached from this?
I think we do see it in our more selective programs. So business and engineering typically, where they, people might look at an overall acceptance rating or just they have an opinion of us as like we should be in their back pocket, a super easy safety. And then maybe they don't get admitted to those programs, especially if you're out of state. And there's a lot of shock and, frustration coming at us. They're like, how could this have happened? I'm like, we got a lot of incredible self-selecting applicants. And, it's a space issue. Yeah.
Absolutely.
One thing that helps us when we've been on the counseling side and we've been doing this and that, we do have anecdotes we can draw off. So when someone starts going there for me with Colorado, particularly for engineering, I have a story. I have a student right now, as we speak, who's at the University of Michigan, who never got in your aerospace. And when I tell people that, they're literally like flabbergasted.
I know. I'm like, how are you all so shocked?
Right.
But no, totally. I think, it takes a long time to change the public conception of a university, especially when, you have differing acceptance rates across programs. So yeah, we definitely, Susan, I actually had this loaded into my NACAC application, I was totally going to come to the standard strong, because I thought it was such a brilliant topic. So thank you for speaking on it.
Well, Mark, this is what we live. I mean, this is why I'm so glad that I have been able to continue being an application reader while I work with kids. Because one thing I said to the counselors at this session is that if you've never had the experience of reading applications, it's very hard. It's very hard to help kids understand. This is a Mark Stucker quote: "Respect the competition." And that it because counselors are astonished as well. But reading applications, and the institution I read for and have read for the last 5 years has very, very differential. Like you just said, Kate, business and engineering are one set of competition. But then there are certain liberal arts majors too, and this is less common, where those majors are way overrepresented in the applicant pool and on campus. Mm-hmm. And students better have a viable second choice. What I say to students is, are you applying to this institution because you love this institution and you want to be there? Or are you applying to this major because you love this major and you want to study it? Because at some institutions, the kids have to say to themselves, if I don't get in to, what did you say, Mark, aerospace engineering?
Yeah, the aerospace is tough. And I learned that when I visited CU.
Right.
Counselor fly-in. And they put the stats up there, but now I see it on my end too. When I attended the CU Boulder counselor fly-in 2 years ago, they showed us the number of kids with perfect 1600s in engineering on the SAT who didn't get in. And I'm telling you, it wasn't a small number.
But if the student says, no, I wouldn't go to a college, I wouldn't go if I didn't get in to a university's aerospace engineering program, that's going to be an entirely different college list from I would go to Colorado and, I could do mechanical engineering and save, aerospace for later or whatever. It's a dimension.
And all their engineerings are competitive. I don't want to make it sound like there's aerospace and a massive drop off. It's just, if you're in Colorado, I don't know if you probably dropped. You were at an 80% admit rate not that long ago. With this surge in applicants, you're probably not there anymore. But I remember if you had a 3.0, you were probably in pretty good shape for all programs other than business and engineering. And so that gets that message out there. Oh, I got a 3.0, I'm getting in Colorado.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I think it's just, colleges evolve over time, and with our, being in the news and being kind of a college of interest, then we just have, that just rises our tide, and we end up making tougher decisions than people expect for us to be doing so. But also, and you've talked about this really nicely, Mark, before, it's just when a student ties quality to acceptance rate, they're kind of lining themselves up for failure and just to feel bad about themselves for no reason, because
missing amazing schools.
Yeah. Because regardless of
schools, I feel like that's something I'm gonna dye black and blue in the face with like trying to do that. And a lot of us around here. I mean, Frank Bruni, that was his book hit that. Salingo's new book. Like we're all sort of crying out there. Like there's amazing schools out here if you can get over this obsession with acceptance rate.
Yeah, exactly. And all these schools that, you might be not so sure about from a selectivity standpoint have incredible resources to provide. Like you can, it's the whole package is there if you, as long as you're open to it.
Friends, this concludes the second part. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. All right, friends, let's transition to my conversation with Hillary. Takeaways we hope you didn't miss as you strive to better understand how admissions officers read files, how admissions committees make decisions.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Hi, Hillary. How's Maine?
It's beautiful, as always. Well, it was beautiful yesterday. Today it's cloudy, but that's what we expect in Maine.
Well, I want to thank you personally for all your work you put in. Kate, I want to thank her. I want to thank Grace. I also want to thank our 5 parents, Nishan, Mary, and Fawn, and our 2 Chris's, Ohio and DC. You gave up a lot of your time, and a lot of us will benefit for this for a long time. I don't think I told you this, but I still work with KIPP. I'm a consultant to KIPP, and so I can go in to them and tell them that I want all their students to do this project, and they'll do it. And so it's going to reverberate. There's that's several hundred students in Atlanta that will go through this as well. So this can continue to be something that can help students. So your work was not in vain.
That's amazing. That's great. It's just like doing case studies is such a good activity for students, but it can be really hard to roll it out to a lot of students at once. And typically we offer case studies at like independent schools, right? So
Sure,
I
sure.
love that we're able to kind of bring it to the masses.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. So I know you have something you want to say because been getting a few questions. And then I want to say something too. So I'll
Yeah.
let you say
So,
your thing.
okay. I mean, I meant to say this when we were first starting to record the case studies, and I totally forgot. But a lot of you have asked me, like, where did these applications come from and how did you create them? And there are a few sets of case study applications. I don't know, I've seen probably five different sets that kind of are just shared among the admission community. And I wish I could say who to give credit to for them, but I don't know where they came from. This is a set of applications that I used last spring at some case studies in Colorado. And, you know, we from time to time will tweak them, we'll change like some GPAs or make some changes here or there. But these ones came to me pretty much in the format that they were already in. I made a few small changes to the college profile, and then kind of made some edits to the reading guide. But other than that, these sort of came to me in the form that they were in already. So it's really nice of you guys to thank me for creating them from scratch, but I didn't create them from scratch. So yeah, it's nice to have these materials that we can kind of share among colleges to help educate students and parents and counselors on how we read.
So here's what I want to say, and I'm going to ask you to guess this, Hillary. Because this is something you don't know.
Okay.
Our listeners have voted.
Uh-oh.
How do you think our listeners voted?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, how do you
Oh
think
my
they voted?
gosh.
So we have Alana, and then we have Alan, and we have Layla, right?
Yeah. So I think in the last recording, I got Alana and Layla confused, and I still can't remember because I haven't
Alana
looked at
was
the
first.
materials in a long time.
Alana was
Okay.
first. New
Yeah,
York, first gen. Does that help you? Remember?
yeah,
You know?
yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like our group leaned pretty heavily toward Alana, so that's going to be my guess, but I would love to hear what the listeners ended up with.
So here's why I can tell you that this set of case studies is really good to use, probably especially with independent school populations. Not that our whole population is independent school, but our demographics indicate that it's not average US demographics. I
Hmm.
mean, 58% with masters, and you know what I mean? And average income is pretty high for average listener. So 47% went for Alana,
Okay.
43% went for Layla, 10 10% went
Wow.
10% went for Alan. So our listeners
Wow. Fascinating.
agreed with the group, but it
Yeah.
was really, really close.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's when you know you have a good case study, right? When it's really like it brings
Yeah.
in all that subjectivity of all of the different factors that come
Yeah.
into play.
I think it'd be really interesting to hear from listeners who they were originally planning to choose when they were just reading on their own, and then if they
Mhm.
changed their mind because they were listening to the discussion.
Sure.
Because I think that's such a like critical part of reading, right? Is
Yeah.
discussing and getting other perspectives. And so it'd be really interesting to know how many folks were sort of on the fence or changed their mind after discussion.
Yeah, and of course everybody had denies and it was across the board. So anyway, I thought I'd share that. And I know you didn't know that. So Hillary's learning
That's
this
awesome.
live. Yep. Awesome. So what we're gonna
Yeah.
do for today is I think this could be really educational. So I've gone through the whole video series from a different prism. I've been through it a few times, but I went through it from a prism of what are some things that were said that I really just want to kind of almost like take a highlighter out and draw attention to. Like listeners, I hope you didn't miss this. There's a lot in there kind of thing. And so I'm
Hmm.
gonna just kind of go through those things and just have you add some commentary. Does that work?
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah.
So the first thing I want to note, and this is why listeners, and I actually was quite pleased from the feedback I got from people that listened to it as an audio, like how much they learned. And I listened to it both ways. It was a great experience listening to it from audio. You learn a lot, but the video is superior. And one of the
Hmm.
things you see on the video is, and you do go through this verbally, but to see it and to verbally go through it, when you pull up the institutional priorities, the academic record, the extracurricular record, and the personal qualities, and then you have your sub points like
Hmm.
6 or 8 under there, that is gold,
Hmm.
listeners. And you, if you don't watch the video for any other reason, just go watch the first 10, 15 minutes and watch that section because I felt like there were so many nuggets that you included in there
Yeah.
that would be helpful for anybody who's trying to understand admissions to understand it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I mean, I would love it if we would share that with candidates who are applying for roles at CC, right?
Yeah.
Because lots of them come in not having read before. And that document was created mostly by Ashley and Michael in my office, who were running case studies with a bunch of students that we bussed in from Denver. And they wanted them to understand how we as an institution read applications. And that really lays out the process that we go through and what we're looking for when we're reading. And I think it is probably like the most insight in a like one page kind of form that you can get in this process when you're thinking about holistic admission.
And another thing I liked about it, there's a lot of things, and we'll get into some of these things here where there's wide variation amongst colleges. But I felt like that section would
Hmm.
be pretty consistent for most schools, most selective school, a
Yeah.
selective college doing holistic admissions. That's a pretty
Hmm.
transferable set of, you know, values. It doesn't mean another school may not say, well, I'd like to have this one in here, but it's in term, you're not going to have
Yeah.
one size fits all completely. But I think
Right.
that's pretty transferable. And we've
Hmm.
always been intending for this. This isn't supposed to be a Colorado College thing or a Grinnell thing or a CU Boulder, right? We're trying to sort
Yeah.
of speak to the broader landscape. So that's first thing. So now let's get into some things. So one of the comments you made on academic, going through on the academic is there an upward trend in grades? We like to see that. I feel that's something that a lot of times people
Hmm.
don't understand how important that is. Any words, anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, what we're looking for is the student's ability to do the work at the college that we're reading for at the time when they enter. And so, and we know that students, they mature at different rates. Not every student is ready to do, a work as a ninth or 10th grader. And sometimes we'll have students who have like an F on their transcript in their sophomore year. And by their senior year, their first semester of their senior year, they're taking 4 AP classes and getting straight A's. Well, that's what I care about the most, right? So is it better to have all A's all the time? Yeah, I guess. But what really matters is that we know that when you get to college, you can do the work.
Yeah, I'm going to go off of our video here and make a comment. One thing I've noticed this year working with students on their applications, I've seen more essays from colleges where one of their optional custom prompts is, was there a time at all in your high school transcript where you had a grade dippage? And if so, would you like to explain that to us?
Mm.
And I think that's fascinating because I know what that stems from, which is you as a
Hmm.
reader knowing there has to be a story over here. Like what this student is not an
Hmm.
F student. Why did they get an F? But they don't take advantage of challenges and challenges and circumstances is new, but they don't take advantage of other places to explain it. And so literally there's schools trying to suss that out of people because they know there's some
Hmm.
context to the story there, right? And they want it to get amplified, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know, and the other thing I want to say is as important as upward grade trend is in, it comes into play. Once again, holistic is context, and there's always going to be
Hmm.
exceptions. I've shared this
Yeah.
on the podcast before. I had a student I worked with last year. They had one non-A in ninth and 10th with a very
Hmm.
rigorous schedule,
Hmm.
34 ACT, two Fs and a D in 11th.
Ooh.
Now you would think kiss of death, but then when you find out in the hospital for 85 days,
Wow. Yeah.
and got treatment, doing better. We said, let's not apply early action. Let's show.
Yeah.
And then they banged out straight A's in 12th. And I think people might be surprised the places where that student got admitted because
Yeah.
the schools were able to see, okay, your ninth and 10th and your 12th is really a better reflection of who you are. So even all the talk on upward trend, there still can be exceptions when
Yeah.
you're doing holistic admissions, which is a contextual read, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really smart then to wait until regular action or
Oh
ED2
yeah.
to
Yeah,
apply for a student like that. I mean,
definitely.
I think like we would probably defer a student like that, knowing that we would want to see the final fall grades, but you can't count on that everywhere.
Sure.
And so I think it makes sense to wait. And there aren't that many times when it makes sense to wait, but that is one of them.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's not a lot of times you should wait, right? People ask me that,
Yeah.
should I apply early action? Well, there's a couple times I can think of when you shouldn't, you know? One of them is you were just adding school at the last minute and there's no possible way for you to put together a good essay or it'd be a sloppy application. Another is this
Hmm.
one, you're coming off a really poor grade. And then the other one is like you take a place like Georgia, they're going to evaluate you at whatever you submit at the time. So if you apply early action, okay, that's your test score, that's your transcript. And if you have reason to believe that having that extra semester, whether it's test score or GPA, is going to significantly boost you, and especially for a school that doesn't give preference at all, in their admission
Hmm.
process to EA, there's no preference, then that could be one. But they're not very many that fit in that category. Most of the time, people should go ahead and take
Yeah.
advantage of early action unless they're picking an ED. If it's an EAED and they're picking ED over EA.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Yep. I agree.
extracurricular, another thing you comment on that I really wanted to underscore is we're looking for where you've spent most of your time. I don't think that's how people think
Mm.
because when I'm meeting with students and they always ask me, what order should I put these in? They're not in that mindset of, well, I've spent a lot of time over here. That seems like it's pretty important. They're in the mindset of what's going to impress the admission office, to be honest. That's kind of
Mhm.
all they think
Yeah.
about, but I think it's
Yeah.
helpful to know you're really looking for that. And when you did we did that activities roundtable, Hillary, that was the first thing you said. Because I have all of the people I work with listen
Hmm.
to that episode 203, the do's and don'ts. That's the very first thing you said. The first thing
Hmm.
I'm looking for is how did you spend your time?
Yeah. I think it's the idea of, you know, where you're spending the most of your time is what's most heavily shaping you. It's where you're making the most impact or being impacted. And it's probably what you care about. And that might be that even if it's that you're working 20 hours a week, well, that's reflective of either your work ethic or your dedication to your family because you've got to be able to, pay for your gas or whatnot. I mean, there's meaning to the ways that we spend our time, and we will be impressed by small things where you're not spending as much time, but I want to get a sense for what you're doing most of the day. That's the kind of number one priority for me.
You said something there that's it's a tangential, but it's related. There is a prompt I'm seeing over and over and over again this year, and it's not unusual, but I've noticed an increase in it. And it's just what forces or factors have shaped you into who you are today, and how will that lead to contribution on our campus?
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing it over and over and over again. And a lot of what you said, that's part of what you're looking at, partly in that EC piece, right? To try to get a sense of that, at
Yeah.
least extracurricularly. Then there's also the personal quality piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. I feel like I repeat to students over and over again that I want
Hmm.
to hear how they became who they are, which is, a
Yes.
lot of what that question is asking.
Yep.
And we don't always know that we will get that in the personal statement, right? And so I
Yep.
think it makes sense to have a question if you really want to suss out like what's important to the student or what is shaping their lives. Sometimes you have to ask directly.
Now, something you said that a listener who watched everything pointed out to me in a counseling session, and I think it's important. So you're talking about the impactfulness component of extracurriculars, and you particularly mentioned if you started a nonprofit, is it going to fizzle away or leave? And I think that's
Hmm.
important for people to know. Like, I interact with more and more selective schools. Say it is so common for someone to put founder down. Like, founder just doesn't
Hmm.
move the needle for us. We see it all the time. But what we want to know is, one, what difference did you make? And is this something that's going to go on after you live?
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't have a crystal ball to know that perfectly, but comment on that because I think it's important for, I'd like our listeners to kind of understand how admission officers think when it comes to, in general, I find students, parents, they're more impressed with titles than selective admission officers
Mm.
are impressed with titles. They think just
Yeah.
president, class officer, founder, captain, just in and of itself moves the needle more than, and the more you go up the selectivity tier, the more there's scrutiny on the impact, not the title. Anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are some titles that we understand really well, right? Like I know what it means to be the student body president of a school. And I know the kind of work that goes along with that and what kind of person you have to be voted into that role. That's really clear to me. And it's lovely to see that. But the more selective the school, the more student body presidents you're going to see in your pool. And so it becomes sort of less and less impressive, even though we know that the student is doing a ton of work. And then there are other titles that are a little bit harder to flesh out, I think. And so it's nice if you can get some details on what it actually means that you founded a club. Like I think one of the examples that I used in the case study or somewhere that we've talked before was about the student who like kind of founded or reinvigorated the sustainability club at her school. And she and her counselor were both able to really help us understand what that meant and the amount of work that went into that. And the way that this student had sort of trained students under her, right, sophomores and juniors, in how to run that club so that the club would continue on. And to me anyway, that shows a real dedication to the sort of community engagement aspect of the work that she was doing and to the topic at hand, right? Sustainability. And that takes a lot more effort and a lot more critical thinking and a lot more planning than just starting something. It's actually not that hard to start something. The hard part is to grow it to the point where it's going to continue without you. And that's what's really impressive to us, not the title so much.
Friends, Hillary pointed out how sometimes when you will see a title, it catches your attention. And I'm glad she said that because there was another point I wanted to bring up with her, and I actually really didn't remember until I was editing this. So one of the things Hillary said in the case studies is she likes to see a student ambassador. And I really wanted to underscore that and draw some attention to that. I feel the exact same way. And the reason is because when you see a student ambassador, you don't get to be an ambassador. And that sometimes is true for other things too, like proctors and prefects and boarding schools. But people who do tour guides and do panel discussions, like you don't get positions like that with having the imprimatur of the administration. So in some ways, it's kind of an implicit recommendation from the school that, yeah, this is a girl, this is a guy that we want to represent us. So I didn't want you to miss that. Yeah, now let's talk about character, and you're getting into the personal qualities. And so you said a lot of things there that are important. You know, you talked about, is the person kind? Is this someone you want to roommate with? You know, what kind of a citizen are they going to be? This wasn't said on the video, but some admission officers will use the term, even as part of the rubric sometimes, does the student play well with others? And that's kind of what you were describing a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does the student play well? Will they play well with others? And this is another thing that I find admission officers value so much more than the average applicant that I work with when they think about how they're going to be assessed. Anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, I think back to the case study and think about kind of the way that we were looking at Alan and how we weren't sure if he was the kind of student who was going to play well with others. And
Mm-hmm.
you could see that reflected in our conversation about him. I mean, we're trying to build a community of people who want to spend time together and want to hang out together and can be honest with each other while also being kind, because we want people to want to be here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it is important to see in the application that this is a student who is going to be have a positive impact on the community, not just because they're involved in lots of things or leading lots of things, but because they're the kind of person who other people are happy to be around. And that goes for our professors too, right? Like, it's important that our faculty are happy with the students who are in class. And some of that is, are they engaging in class? But it's also the way that they're engaging in class. So we're looking for that nuance in how students communicate and how they behave in community.
And then something I wanted to point it out, because this is something that is very different for schools. So right away on the top of your dashboard, you show their engagement level, right? You can see that they attend a virtual event, in person, blah, blah. Some schools don't do that. The Rochesters, Drews, American, that's a really big thing for them. And then there's other schools that intentionally don't see that at all. And so I just wanted to point out that I don't want people to think, oh, that's how every college does that on that point.
And and I think it's a real spectrum, right? I mean, for us, like, students have asked me, they've said, well, I've been on campus and I came to a high school visit. What else do I need to do? And I'm like, you don't need to do anything else. Like, for us, it's really just a checkbox where I see that they've engaged in one way. That's all that I need to know that they understand CC and that they're interested in CC. But then other schools have, you can check 10 things that the student has done, ways that they've engaged, all the way down to the colleges who don't care at all. So it is a really wide spectrum. But I think I put that on there because I wanted listeners to see that it's something that we're able to see, depending on how the school sets up their slate dashboard, that there's a possibility that you can just open up the file and the first thing that you see is, oh, this student has engaged with us 8 times, or this student hasn't engaged with us at all, or the student registered for something and then they didn't show up. We can see that too, which doesn't necessarily reflect poorly on you, because we know sometimes you don't sign in, or you're using somebody else's computer to get to the Zoom link or whatever, and maybe something goes wrong there. But all of that can be visible if the college wants it to.
I'm really glad you put that on there, just because enough schools are doing that people should be aware of it. And there's no doubt in my mind, and I think I have clear evidence of this, the trend line is for more and more of that, as increasingly, the more, all the factors we talk about all the time, it gets harder and harder to bring in your class. And people apply to more and more schools, then yield becomes more important. And I'm seeing that in the public schools as well. And, this isn't only yield, because it could also be partly seen as maybe a proxy to what extent do they get us, or at least it could be maybe, it wouldn't be exclusively used that way, but an inkling, an impression. What do they know about us?
Yeah.
That plays a role.
I think the tough thing is, if students are applying to 20 schools, you can't do this well for all of them, right? Like, you really can't engage in ways that are meaningful with all of the schools that you're applying to. So it really, even though this is something that students could just keep signing up for and showing up at events, it's hard to do that with a lot of schools. So in some ways, it is still a decent kind of test for, would you actually come here if you were admitted? So it's weird, kind of, as things change and as students apply to more schools, how things shift a little bit, but that feels like it is sort of staying relevant.
No, I can't remember even who it was. It might have been Andy, but I was talking with someone. I might quote the wrong person. I think it was Greg Zeiser, now that I think about it, at Elon. Had to do with appeals. When people appeal an aid award, is that frustrating, the growing use of appeals? And the response was, you're not going around and doing that with 20 schools. So the fact that you're doing that tells us that we're in the game. And so, you know what I mean? Like, I know it is challenging. And this came out in Susan in my interview with Bob Massa, how hard it is for schools as people go from maybe applying to 8 schools to 16, like how difficult it is to, wow, we got a 1 in 16 chance here numerically. At the end of the day, it is your job to bring in your class.
Yeah.
I always say that to people. It's not your job to pass out trophies or ribbons for someone who meets some proverbial standard of acceptance.
Right.
So I loved when you got into the conversation with Alana and you really emphasized how much the evaluation is done through the prism of what the school has to offer.
Hmm.
This is something I don't feel students understand to the fault. Not the faulting students. How can they, right? Like this is not their. Well,
Hmm.
a lot of these things we're talking about, unless you either do admissions or you're just a total admissions junkie and you go around looking at things like this, case, you're really not going to know this, all these little intricacies. So it's not a
Yeah.
fault when I say that, but the average person I work with just really has no idea how much their school context comes into play in the read. And you guys covered that in many, many, many ways. One of them was when you talked about,
Yeah.
oh, I love a grade distribution. Another one was when you
Hmm.
talked about, oh, look, this school has 25 APs, versus
Hmm.
this. Another one is when you looked at, sort of average testing profiles. And um, for the most part, people are in their own echo chamber and they don't and they don't even have a sense of the breadth of how many different types of schools are out there.
Yeah.
And how could they know anything other than their own world? But it
Right.
does put students and parents at a disadvantage for understanding why a lot of decisions happen
Hmm.
because they don't have the full breadth and range of how many different schools are out there and how much school context comes into play in the read. I don't know if you have any
Yeah.
thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is interesting because as I'm traveling now, right? I'm in
Hmm.
Maine right now, and I was in Vermont and New Hampshire 2 weeks ago, and I'll be in Massachusetts for another week. I was just in Massachusetts for a week last week. As I'm going from high school to high school, I'm having conversations with counselors to help me
Hmm.
understand the context of their schools. And even though I can be reading a school for 5 years,
Hmm.
things change there. It's easy to sort of mix them up. And so as I'm chatting with counselors, I'm asking them, like, remind me, how many advanced classes are your students allowed to take here? And then
Hmm.
they'll tell me, oh, we limit it to two per year. And and then I'll ask them, like, how does that go with parents? Like, are parents okay with that? Or and they'll say, I remember last week having a conversation at an independent school in Boston, and the counselor was like, yeah, our parents sometimes have a really hard time with that, and we tell them, there's a public school down the street that's a power public where if your student wants to take 6 APs a year, they can, but you chose this school because of the way that we educate our students, and
Hmm.
this is part of it. And we're sharing this information with counselors also, that the students are limited to two. If they want to take more, they have to get special permission because the courses really are that hard at those
Hmm.
schools, and they're thinking about the students' mental health, and
Hmm.
they don't want the students to be overwhelmed. And we appreciate that on the college side. Like, we
Yeah.
want students to come to us mentally healthy. Our job is a lot easier if they come to us understanding how to limit their stress, how to deal with their stress. And so if your students going to a school where they're limited in how much rigor they can take, and the baseline courses are already quite rigorous, then that school that you've chosen is doing your student some favors and doing you some favors by creating a sort of attainable, accessible education that is still rigorous and challenging for your student. And so I try to have those conversations with counselors so that I can remind myself of what's available and kind of what the atmosphere is like at that school. And then when it comes time to read, I'll have to remind myself again, right? I'll pull up the course or the school
Hmm.
profile and look for what the limits are on what's available to the student. And, or if there are no limits, then understanding that's a different kind of pressure, right?
Sure.
Like at the public school down the street that offers 20 APs and students are sort of vying to take more than their best friend. That's that's a really challenging environment for students to be in. And so offering some grace for those students too. But our job as a territory rep is to understand the nuances between those different schools. And I think that that is something that students and parents miss because they're only in their own school environment, and they don't often know how much time and care we take to get a feel for different schools.
Yeah, one thing I tell my students in a situation like that is if you're, find out first of all if your school counselor is making it crystal clear. Either check their profile or find out if they'll include it, in the secondary school report or something. And if they don't, then that's something you should feel free to use in additional information to say,
Absolutely.
Yep. At our school, we're limited to 2 APs in ninth and two in 10th, three in 11th, three in 12th, whatever it is. That's
Yep.
going to be
I think that's
helpful.
a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great idea, even if you think that your school is doing a great job. If you
Just
don't
so you
have
don't miss
anything
it.
else to, yeah. And so
Yeah.
the person after me, like when that file goes to subcommittee, I
Yeah.
might not be there
Yeah.
in that subcommittee,
Mm-hmm.
and I should have made notes
Mm-hmm.
so that whoever is looking at it after me and my first partner
Mm-hmm.
look at it will know. But just in case the rep
Yeah.
hasn't done it, I would for sure say it's smart to put that in the additional information section. It needs to be like 10 words. Don't
Sure.
write a paragraph.
You don't use the 300 up.
No. I mean, the shorter and more sort of pithy you can make it, the better.
Yeah, that's a great point, Hillary. I hope everybody caught that. Another point that I thought was helpful, it came up with letters of rec. So for CU Boulder and for Grinnell, the letters of rec are at the end, where they're not at the end for you, right? And it's just helpful for people to know. Go ahead. That different people don't. Not everybody reads the files in the same way, same order, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like not everybody does read a file in the same order. Like I've heard so many different things, and mission officers have told me over the years to what they start with. I've had people say they start with the essays. I've had people say they start with the demographics. I've had people say they start right with the numbers stuff, just to probably see if someone's competitive or what. I mean, and then obviously the biographical background, getting understanding of the I've heard so many different things over the years that different admission officers have told me this is where I start, that people should know just to understand that there's different approaches to reading a file.
Yeah, for sure. Our teacher recs end up at the very end of the file, but it's the counselor evaluation that's in the beginning. It comes to us with the school report. So the school profile, the transcript, the teacher or the counselor evaluation is all at the very beginning. I really like reading it that way because it gives me, the counselor evaluation sort of gives me some clues about what I should be looking for in the file. It makes it so that if there was a dip in grades, I know about it before I even read the transcript, because usually the order is the school profile, the counselor evaluation, and then the transcripts, so that I have a sense for kind of what I'm getting into. For me, I think it makes the reading more efficient. So I really like having that at the beginning, and then having the teacher recs at the end gives me sort of a wrap up, or helps to emphasize something that I already knew from the read. So I like the way that we have it set up, but it is really interesting to me that there are so many different ways of kind of ordering your materials when you're reading.
Absolutely. Another point that brought up really clearly is why in and of itself GPA is almost a non-factor. Like without understanding context, GPA is meaningless, right? Like people, and that's just not something people understand. Like I'll have a brand new student or meeting with them, or sometimes even before I've met, even in an email that comes across, and they'll say something like, he has a 4.8 GPA. That means nothing to me.
Nothing.
So why don't you, and I know from an average person, the way they think of that, well, I thought grades were important. So they think GPA equals grades. So I thought grades were important. How can you tell me GPA? So why don't you unpack that for someone who's not understanding that disconnect there, Hillary?
Yeah, this is the hardest question that I get when I'm on the road. Often at college fairs, students will come up to me and say, well, what's the average GPA? Or what do I need? What do my GPA to be to get in? And I'm like, I really have no idea, but I can tell you definitely need more A's than B's. And if you have fewer than 4 B's, you're in really good shape. So I don't know how other schools do this, but I think most of us recalculate GPAs. It was really interesting to hear that Grace doesn't at Grinnell. But we have like these drop-down menus where we've got one drop-down for rigor. Was your curriculum the most demanding available, like, or pretty demanding, or like college prep, not demanding at all. Those are like four, maybe, I can't remember exactly what the four different drop downs available are, but they're basically to give us a chance to sort of weight your coursework, right? So this is the same as what you would get from adding a point to your GPA. So those are based on, there's like a rubric that tells us how many rigorous courses you need to have in order to fit into one of those. And we recalibrate a little bit as we do each student to understand what's typical within their context. And then we have another drop down that's about your grades. Did you have straight A's with not more than 2 A minuses? Did you have almost all A's, but you've got 4 B's in there, no more than 4 B's? Do you have more A's than B's? Is it about evenly split between A's and B's? So we're like actually counting the grades to see how many A's and B's and C's, D's, F's you have. And there's a different drop down that we can choose for each of those. And we get to count how many academic solids you have. So like we expect that you're taking 5 a year, but in the drop down, we can choose, have you taken more than 20 solids in your 4 years of high school? Did you take 19 to 20? Did you take 17 to 18? We can drop down all the way to like fewer than 16 solids. And that's not going to get you a very good rating, right? So all of these different drop downs are then going into the sort of background to help us recalculate your GPA, which doesn't actually come out as an average for us. It just comes out as a whole number. But it's doing very similar things to what a GPA does, especially a weighted GPA. But it's giving us the opportunity to sort out the classes that we don't think are helpful for knowing what your academic performance is going to be like at CC, like your band class or your choir class or your PE class or other things like that are like yearbook, right? I'm not going to count yearbook because that's not an equivalent to something that we're teaching at CC. So it's just another way of recalculating GPA, but in a way that then we're able as admission readers to kind of understand where you're falling compared to everybody else coming in the applicant pool. Because if we were to try to compare GPAs, that would not be helpful to us because they are so different across the board.
Yeah, friends, and just so you know, solid is going to be math, English, science, social studies, foreign language, right? That's making that sometimes called the academic GPA or the core classes.
Yeah.
So that's what Hillary's referring to.
Or anything that's a super rigorous class, like an AP studio art, an AP art history, an IB art, those kinds of, or at independent schools that don't use AP or IB, like their most advanced classes, sometimes they're called advanced topics, or they have numbers before them and they're 500 level or whatever. Those, if they're super rigorous in a discipline that we don't typically consider an academic discipline, we'll throw them in there, at least at CC. I don't know how other schools do it.
And just to add one other level of nuance to this, so the next time you guys hear from Andy Strickler, I'm doing the recording with him on Friday. We're going through the AP classes, and he's just going to categorize them from his experience, like robust, sort of mid-tier, or AP light. Like we know BC Calc is not the same as AP Pre-Calc, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be an interesting, another level of nuance that, you guys can look forward to hearing that the next time he's up in the rotation. So let's move on to Alan. Some things that were noteworthy here, I felt. I love how Kate pointed out that his custom prompt, SUP, as you refer to it, overlapped a lot with the personal statement. And talk about why you don't like to see that. Yeah,
I think just because you're giving up an opportunity to show us a different side of yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's not, I do feel like I don't have to read it as closely if it's repetition from what I've already seen. So it makes the process faster for me. But as a student, you are missing out on a chance to show me another side of who you are. And we really like to understand you from as many perspectives as we can. I think we use the word multifaceted quite a bit in that case study. And I like you want to be multifaceted, and you are, because you're a human being, but you're having an opportunity to showcase that or not. And if you don't showcase it, then you're missing out.
Right. And that's not, automatic denial. There's overlap here.
No.
It's just more of a missed opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing that came up in the conversation with Alan when you were having a back and forth with Kate a little bit with how the role of major plays very differently at the school. And I think this is something that people really don't understand. And, I've talked about this on the podcast before. For me, this can be complex, right? Because, and I've been doing this work all the time for 25 years, because you got to understand, does a school admit by major? Do they admit by college? And then you get to pick and choose within the major. Do they admit to the whole school? If they admit to the whole school, do you just pick and choose any major you want? Or then do you have to apply to get into majors? And then it's very common. Some majors you have to apply to, others you can just pick and choose. And then how the mindset of the liberal arts when it comes to interdisciplinary training of the brain and how that can be different from a major research university. It's a lot to kind of get your hands around, but it is important to understand how major plays a role in how you're being evaluated. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting when I stand at a college fair and I listen to the schools around me talking about this, because we all answer it a little bit differently. Well, within the liberal arts, it's sort of the same answer, like it doesn't matter. In fact, I was listening to my friend Nikki, who works at Conn College. I'm often next to Conn. And a student kept asking her questions about, like, well, if I apply into the psychology major, and she's like, you're not going to apply into the psychology major because that's not an option here. And then the student was like, so when I apply into the psychology major, and we were both like sighing as we're listening to the student, because like clearly she did not hear Nikki the first time say, you will not be applying into the psychology major. So that's really different, right, from schools where like Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, where you have to apply into the major, and once you get in, you may not be able to switch. And then it really does matter. Your application really needs to reflect that that's your interest and that you're going to do it well. I've been kind of emailing with a friend of a friend who is a parent of a student who's applying to an Ivy, and the student is I think legitimately an artistic student who's interested in art history, but ultimately wants to end up in business, and said to me in an email, well, the royal we are going to apply with a major in art history, but then hopefully switch to business later. And God, hearing that it grates on me, right? Because I don't love to see students, or parents in this case, trying to work the system in that way. And you just want students to be who they're going to be and end up at the place that's right for them, because they're ready to do the work in the major that they genuinely want to apply for. So that it's really hard for me to hear when people try to work the system like that. And it's nice to be at a place where I can say completely honestly and directly, I don't care what you put down on the academic interest area of our application, because I'm looking at you as a whole student, not as a student in one particular discipline, because I want students to have the chance to change once they get there. But again, it's different for every college.
Right. And just because a school doesn't admit by major, it doesn't mean your application may not be seen partly through the prism of what you say you're interested in. If you're going on and on and on, there are
some schools.
Well, if you're going on and on and on about how you want to be a math major, but then those are your worst grades, like that can impact you at certain liberal arts schools, depending on how they do things.
It does raise some eyebrows.
Yeah. And then even the other thing, like I feel bad. Sometimes you try to capture the nuance. It gets so complicated, but you want to be accurate. So a place like Cal Poly, they make it hard to switch majors. You can switch majors. When I was there, they told me about somebody who switched 9 times. So it can be done, but they make it hard. Like for them, if you go switch into a program, they go back and look at your original application. And if you were not competitive for that program at the time, then it's done. Where other schools, they might judge you more off how well you're doing in the curriculum as a student. at
Hmm.
their school, and then other schools just have forbidden programs that say there's no internal transferring. That came up in an interview with Texas, right? There's no internal
Hmm.
transferring into some of these programs. So, yeah, it's a lot of research to do, and all these schools are different.
Yeah.
So another point that came up here was, and it just talks about the little things that you pick up, little clues and cues about character. I don't remember, which who those you or Grace or Kate that mentioned it, but you were talking about Layla, and you said I like to see a go-getter, but then it also says that she likes to see other students succeed. And that sort of
Hmm.
says something about her character, right? Like she's not just
Yeah.
totally caught up in her own ambition. And for this point,
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring up there's a lot of little clues and cues that come up in file reading that speak to character. I can't remember the student now, but there
Hmm.
was some comments about, is this the person that's going to dominate the conversation and speak over
Hmm.
everybody? It might have been Alan, maybe.
Alan.
Yeah, on that, right? And there's these little things that are said that are like little cues that, okay, we're trying to picture this person on our campus. And everything to some extent helps form an impression, whether it's an
Hmm.
academic or a personal quality, or extracurricular that kind of gives you part of the picture of who the person is.
Yeah. Yeah. When we were talking about Alana as being ambitious, but also taking others along with her, like that's a really nice balance to have, right? Because often you
Sure.
hear the word ambitious and it has sort of a negative connotation because it's positive that you're a go-getter, but can be negative if it means that you're sort of cutting others out of your success. And that's not what anybody wants to see. So being able to see both sides of her was really helpful.
Another conversation I thought you had was really fascinating. I hope listeners caught. You were talking about Layla, and you were talking about how the fact that one parent went to Harvard, one went to Dartmouth, and how that plays a role or doesn't play a role in the read, right? Because there were so many different ways that could be sliced. It could be
Hmm.
we don't want to hold your privilege against you, but at the same time, we understanding your privilege is part of understanding who you are. And then different institutions might have different thoughts on whether you're yieldable, and that could come into play. That was a really great nuanced conversation. Anything you want to add to that one, Hillary?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes we'll see students who have parents who went to two Ivies or both went to Stanford or something. And I mean, this is maybe a little bit unique to CC because CC is a unique place in many ways, but we will we won't automatically think that the student is not yieldable because what we offer is quite different and our community is quite different from some of those schools. But
And listeners,
then
if you're not fully
it can
following
be
that,
really
part of that is the block plan, right? Like CC's got the one course at a time,
yeah, part of that
eh,
is the block
you know,
plan. Yeah,
you
and
know,
it's the small community, it's the really well connected community, meaning connected with each other.
yeah.
Our students are just exceedingly kind and gracious in ways that it's hard to find at more competitive schools. And so we won't immediately discount that the student is not going to come here because they might be more likely to get into a more competitive school. But then on the sort of other end, when the forms start rolling in, telling us where a student ended up, you do often see that they ended up at their parents' school or at a school of equal competitiveness. And that sometimes is frustrating. Sometimes you kind of knew because they didn't really seem all that interested, but it can be frustrating when you lose that battle. But it is unpredictable, I think. And so we don't rely a lot on where the parents went as a way to guess where the student is going to end up. But it is sort of just another interesting data point in a file full of many, many data points.
And then this came up as well with Layla. Grace made a lot of good points around a sibling. How do you interpret a sibling at a certain school? How that can be dangerous. You can't assume twins want to go to the same place.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe somebody wants something different. This is where bias training. You had a good conversation about bias training and how every schools go through bias
Mm-hmm.
training. She said something that I didn't know, which I thought was fascinating, which was one of the original reasons for having that question was different schools interpret another thing that was said is who was a first gen student and how it's different at some schools, but how some schools count siblings as not being first gen if you've had a sibling who's a graduate. I thought that was interesting. And that was one thing I actually learned myself from the video series. And some legacy differently, and some will give you legacy status but based off of that. So they're using it partly for legacy. And then some of the schools have been backing off that as different schools move away from legacy. So that was, that was fascinating, and how that question has been removed from a standard question in the application, on siblings.
Yeah, I could see how at some schools, like at CC, probably knowing that your sibling attends CC gives us that's probably more predictive of whether that student is going to come to CC than knowing where their parents went, because we have a lot of siblings at CC. And so I could see where some schools might use that as a way of just like legacy predicting whether a student's going to come or not. But it's also just another point of data, right? You can't use it to make a decision, because that alone, whether the sibling is at the school or not, is not enough information to make a decision on a student. But it can be really interesting. It can especially be interesting if the older sibling is at a community college or is at some place that is much less selective, and you don't know if that's because the student didn't have the grades to go, or if there was something else going on that made the student not want to go to a four-year school or residential college. But it is an interesting thing to think about, a student coming from a background where their older sibling didn't go to a four-year school or didn't go to a residential school. It's just another little sort of like puzzle piece that, as you try to like figure out what you're looking at and get this whole picture, and you keep getting these little puzzle pieces that you can add in if you can find the right spot to put them, to see the whole picture of the student revealed. And each one is just a little bit more information.
Yeah, and I think this one's really complex, right? So let's say you're working with someone, in this case, parent to Harvard, the other to Dartmouth. I've certainly worked with plenty of people, multiple Stanford professors or double PhDs from these places. How that factors into the read is complex, because on the one hand, when a lot of schools look at the concept of distance traveled. And when you're looking at distance traveled, it makes sense to infer with that type of background, we would expect somebody to have some advantages that end up carrying over to parts of the application. But yet, how do you not bias that person? It's very difficult. I know, I'll just be honest, I would have voted for Alana if I was at your, and the reason I would have done that is because I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of kids that were under-resourced and hundreds of kids that are very resourced. And you're more likely to see someone like Layla that's going to come from double PhDs, double doctor, Harvard. That's not as atypical as it is to have a dad that didn't even graduate from high school, a mom that didn't even graduate from high school, Spanish spoken in the home, and then to produce at the level that she was producing. That is far more rare. And that's part of a contextual read. But I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I think what's important to remember in those situations is that unlike in a case study, we're not pitting those two students against each other, right? And so, yes, I'm reading Alana in her context where she's coming from, has a huge distance traveled. And then I'm reading Layla in her context where she's grown up with two very well-educated parents. And I don't hold that against her. In my territory, because I've got Cambridge, Massachusetts in my territory, I read a lot of students whose parents are professors, who, are regularly publishing books and articles, and those kids have grown up in a really lovely environment and also a really tough environment. Those kinds of expectations are rough on a student. And so I try to remember that also when I'm reading those students, that like, I find this especially with boys, that they may not be performing at the level that their parents performed when their parents were 16 or 17 years old. And they're certainly not performing up to their parents' level when their parents are 50 and have PhDs, and are teaching or researching at two of the sort of premier universities in the country.
Now, friends, Hiller's referring to MIT and Harvard, the two hardest schools from my 25 years of doing this to get into, both of which are in Cambridge.
And I just want kids to be kids. And so while they have had a lot working in their favor, I also know that the kind of pressure that that can put on them can be really hard. And so in that situation, I don't think about distance traveled as much as I do about what is the student interested in? How do they enjoy spending their time? Are they, are they showing me that they're curious and that they are interested in critical thinking? And maybe that is wholly reflected in their grades, and maybe their grades are a little bit lower than they seem like they should be, given the situation that they're coming from. But that situation that they're coming from is hard in its own ways.
That's a really, really important point, Hillary. That's a really important point.
I don't want to get out a tiny, violin for these students, but but
that's a funny way of putting it.
They also have their own kinds of challenges, and the teenage brain is complicated, and each of these students is an individual.
And the one reason I like this point so much, not only because of what you said and everything you said was true, but I work with a lot of these families and they have so much pressure. I really feel for them.
Yeah.
Like the expectation that they go to some T20 school is just immense. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are just cracking under that pressure. It's terrible. Mm-hmm. I really feel for them. Like, I think some people might look at them, oh, that person's privileged, they have everything. That a lot comes with that. A lot of really difficult stuff to deal with. So, and the other reason why I think this is important, and this is something that Grace brought up at the end, there's aspects of the case study that are not real. And this is something Susan likes to really point out, because in reality, you're not just pitting one student against the other, right? In reality, ideally, you take Alana and you take Layla, right? Like, it's not always like that. And so I think that was important that you guys established that both at the end. Like, this is probably as good as you can do to help people understand how the process works, but there still are some aspects that are manufactured. It's not like there's only one spot, But what gets hard is the Layla type of student. They are so common in the Brown pools, in the Harvard pools, in the Yale pools, in the Stanford pools, in the Duke pools, in the Penn pools, like in the Michigan. They are so common, and that's something that the average person just does not understand. Like, it is, it's really common to see kids, that have like 36, 35 ACT, 1550 to 1600, 8 5s or more on APs. Like, that is really, really common. It's almost the norm in those pools. And
it's
it really is
common that it almost becomes irrelevant, right? Because if everyone in your pool has that, then you're really leaning on the other sort of the soft skills and personality traits and other things that make the student the person who they are. Because once everybody is like a super achiever, you gotta look beyond their academics.
Yeah, and part of me hates saying that, because I'm really mindful of a student I worked with 7 years ago. And they're like, the reason I like your podcast is you don't stress me out. I was listening to another podcast and it was stressing me out. Like, I realized that could be a very stressed me out kind of statement that I made. But one of the things I find that produces this disconnect of how in the world did I not get in is people not realizing how common that is. And while it would be discouraging, I kind of do wish there was a case studies out there for the 5% type at mid schools for people to see, like, what type of kids end up getting denied or deferred in that pool. I think it would help so many of those kinds of kids or their parents who just think, oh, I'm ranked number 3 out of 300 in my class.
Right.
I have a 1590. I got this, I got that. My activities are good. My teachers like me, this, that, the other. Like, how can I not get in? Because I just encounter so much genuine, sincere entitlement that comes from people with that profile. And it's only because they don't see the whole rest of the applicant pool. Like that's 99% of it. If they could literally read files, they would be like, "Oh, now I get it." But how can you when
Yeah.
you're in your own echo chamber? You know?
Yeah.
Couple.
Yesterday I was driving around Maine, and I was thinking about what I love our students from Maine.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to think about what it is about these students up here that makes me love them so much. And the word grounded kept coming to my mind. But these students they're in a different environment, a different physical environment, and in a different social environment without quite as much pressure as my students in Massachusetts have. I mean, social pressure to perform academically. And they just seem to really know themselves well. And I think that is what shines through in the admission process that I don't necessarily see from students who are in super high pressure environments. Like these students, some of them will go out to the ocean and do a cold plunge once a week. They just go before school. They're fully in the water. I saw a lot of people much older than I am doing cold plunges up here this weekend. And it was 56 degrees, right? And it takes the water, right? I broke my foot at a school this week, which was super embarrassing.
Oh,
and so
goodness.
I was soaking my foot in the ocean. I know. So I've got my foot in and I'm watching these old ladies go in and they spend 10 minutes in this 56-degree water. And this is something that I've heard so much about from these students in Maine is how like, oh yeah, every Monday morning before school, I go down and I do a cold plunge in the ocean or in the lake near my house or whatever. And like, it's wild to me, but that is like sort of, I don't know, symbolic, I think, of the kinds of students who are up here who are willing to do something that's hard and uncomfortable, but they're doing it because they love the way that it feels, right? They're not doing it because someone is telling them that they have to, or because they're trying to win some kind of award, or because they're trying to get into a top 20 school. They're just doing it because it's part of their way of life. And the students here are grounded in ways that I just don't see from everyone in our applicant pool. And that when you have a lot of students who are striving, that sort of honesty about who the student is and authenticity ends up really shining through. And so I guess I would say, like, as we're thinking about kind of the rat race that admission can sometimes feel like, when you've got a bunch of students who all have great grades, it's that authenticity to who you are and the like understanding that you really know yourself well and you can articulate that. That's what ends up shining through.
Well said. So I'm curious, do you see that in the Midwest kids? Because I see it in the Midwest kids.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't read the Midwest very often unless I'm hearing about them in committee. But as someone who lived in Cincinnati for 9 years, yeah, like I can certainly see that kind of groundedness there. Again, it depends on where they're going to school, because there are some I can think of. I worked in the Cincinnati schools before I moved, and I can think of some that feel almost as sort of wildly competitive as schools in Palo Alto or Boston. But for the most part, yeah, they're also a grounded group of students.
And the North Shore of Chicago is different. Like the North Shore of Chicago, that's, Hinsdale, places like that, those towns like that.
True.
Yeah, those places feel more like Boston, Palo Alto, New York. But
sure.
I'm talking about like you have like a Michigan or Minnesota or Kansas or Missouri,
my husband
Illinois
is from
outside
Dayton.
of Illinois outside of Chicago. They're really thinking a lot about fit and they're liberated a lot from the rat race. But social class still does play a role, because you take very affluent families in super affluent districts and put them at an independent school or something like that, and you can have a different dynamic. But anyway, that's a whole nother topic for another day.
Totally.
Yeah. So only a couple last things here I wanted to call attention to. One was, I thought was a fascinating conversation for Layla. Why no mention of soccer when she played soccer? Like, was she trying to present herself as pointy or spiky and just focus on and trying to make her science part pop? But then, like you said, we tell people not to mention things that are not important to them. or to prioritize your list. And maybe soccer wasn't important to her, so she's not obligated to have to include it just because she did it. I thought that was a very interesting, nuanced conversation. I don't know if you have any thoughts on somebody doing activities and not listing them. Oh, and in addition to that, I
Yeah.
thought this was a really good point with Alana. I never mentioned um, depth matters over breadth. And so not a problem that she had 5 activities. Some people feel like they need to fill the thing up. So I don't know if you want to say anything about either of those things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't even notice that Layla had left out soccer until someone pointed it
Hmm.
out in the
Hmm.
case study.
Hmm.
And then when I reflect on it, I wonder, like, was she doing that because, like, we had a question from a listener a few
Hmm.
weeks ago that was like,
Hmm.
if my student's not going to play
Sure.
soccer in college, like, does
Yep.
it even matter that they're doing it in high school?
Yes.
Um, and so maybe she thought it didn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Because she wasn't planning on playing soccer in college, or maybe she couldn't see the value of soccer as an activity when she had these other things that were more sort of STEM focused. So I I mean, I didn't notice it. I don't know if maybe I would have noticed it if I were
Hmm.
reading with a
Sure.
partner. But we think more about what's on the application than
Hmm.
what's missing from
Hmm.
the application
Hmm.
generally, unless it's a situation where the student didn't put anything down on their activities list. Then
Sure, of
I'm
course.
kind of combing through recommendations to see what a student was actually doing.
How
But
often do you
yeah,
see that,
I don't have
Hillary? Because it's funny. I have a because I read tons and tons of student stuff. I get
mhm.
most of what you see, but there's a piece I don't have like that, right? Because
Yeah.
no one's going to work with me. He's going to have no activities.
Yeah, I see it quite a bit from students who go to big public schools in
Hmm.
less resourced areas, or schools that are less resourced, where they're just not very savvy about the
Yeah.
application process.
Yeah.
Sometimes rural students, but
Hmm.
like, even I can think of our Colorado Springs schools where
Hmm.
I know that, especially where students are taking really tough curriculum,
Hmm.
and, like, they're achieving really well in lots of areas academically, they just don't know what they're supposed to put on there, or they don't think it's important, or they're rushing their application process. And so it's not typically the kinds of students who you would work with, right? But it especially happens in our regular action round when
Hmm.
students haven't gotten the counseling to apply early. That's when you tend to see those kinds of applications.
So another thing, I thought this was great, a point that Kate brought up, that the prompt felt for Layla like it could have been copied and pasted and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't customized. The answer felt like
Mm-hmm.
this could apply to so many schools. This is something I talk about to students all the time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is your answer to this something that only fits this school? And this
Mm-hmm.
happens when people speak in these vague terms, right? Like strong
Yeah.
academics, or
Mm-hmm.
even saying good program in an area. Talk about
Mm-hmm.
that and I know your prompt is a little different. I've read it this year. I've worked with students on it.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have kids, and
Yeah.
you've seen lots of prompts,
And
you know, talk about
yeah,
this when
and
you
in the
feel like the
past,
prompt could just be cookie cutter and could be used for a lot of schools. And, any thoughts on the impression that creates?
yeah, in the past we've had a YCC question, and one of my colleagues, Michael, calls it the thumb response. If you can cover up the name of the school with your thumb, and you can't tell what school they're talking about, then that's not a great response. And that happens a lot. I think it's happening even more now that students are using generative AI to answer questions. Those end up more general than even the generally written student questions. So, I mean, it's definitely something to look out for. And it's kind of like, I would have said that Layla's application already felt like it wasn't quite right for a small liberal arts school. It didn't seem like that's really what she was looking for. And she had an opportunity to sort of turn that around in the supplemental question, and she didn't really.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
um I mean, it gives you, that's sort of, you put all of those pieces together, and it gives you an idea that she's maybe not that interested in coming, even though she was, I think, academically maybe had the strongest application or close to it in the pool.
Yeah, and that speaks to importance of fit too, institutional fit, which you guys
Hmm.
emphasized over and over and over again. I thought it was smart for you to take
Yeah.
a lot of time at the start to really go through Cascadia and establish
Hmm.
institutional priorities and let people know. I think that that's something I feel like our listeners probably have a pretty good handle on that because I feel like we
Hmm.
cover that a lot. But I find the average person that's not listening to a podcast like ours or some of the other really good podcasts that are out there they don't have as much of an understanding of it. They're just thinking in terms of my GPA is higher than yours, my test scores are higher than yours. Why did you get in and I didn't? What's wrong with this here?
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
this picture. Yeah. And the last thing that I have here, which I actually thought was great, was a little bit of a debate ensued at the end. Like not everybody had the
Hmm.
strong opinion at the same opinion. You could tell people had some passion. Of course, that came through on
Hmm.
who they chose, but it also came
Yeah.
through even at different times. Like some people like certain essays, some people didn't like certain essays.
Hmm.
And one thing that I think hopefully people learn from this is that, as Rick Clark likes to say, holistic admissions is human admissions,
Yeah.
you know? And that piece really comes on into play. You can do all the bias training you want. People have different vantage points, different things land differently with people.
Yep.
And hence we have 47% for Alana, 43% for Layla, 10% for Alan in our listenership.
Hmm.
Yeah. Any final
Yeah.
words on
I
that?
think, I think part of that is also because we read really quickly, right? And
Sure.
so we might miss something the first time
Mm-hmm.
through, and it helps to have other readers coming along pointing out things that we might have missed. Because when you're reading that fast, you're bound to miss something, and that's the sort of power of reading in teams and
Mm-hmm.
having applications go through sort of multiple rounds of reading. Um, because it is easy to miss something. When I was doing this case study, I had set aside 20 minutes for myself to go back over the applications
Mm-hmm.
before we started recording. And there was like a minor comms emergency that came up in that time, and somebody came to grab me, and I didn't get to look over the applications, and I hadn't read them since like April.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I think that helped me moderate because I didn't know the
That's
applications
good.
that well. Like I was sort of refreshing my brain as I
That's
was
funny.
reading through them. But yeah, but I think that's also sort of a little bit true to when we're reading how you can miss things, and it really benefits the whole process to have multiple eyes on a file.
Cool, cool. I have one last little question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. This is kind of off topic. I find it totally fascinating the differences in the country as I work with people all over. And we talked a little bit about Midwest. One thing I notice is a major difference is how, if you want to call it economical, thrifty, like Midwest families are so practical that way. Like I could have the same family from Boston, the same financial profile of a family from Boston, and they're like, I'll pay full pay at 100,000. And then my Midwest family is like, I'm not paying more than 40,000 anywhere. And like they're very much
Hmm.
cost
Hmm.
conscious. Do you notice that at all? Is that
Yeah.
it's a total
Yes.
different
There's a
mindset.
different sensibility.
Yes, it's
Hmm.
totally different. It just makes
Yeah.
things
Well,
fascinating.
and when you think about even if you're living in like Indian Hill in Cincinnati, where
Hmm.
houses cost as much as they do in Boston or close to it, you're still surrounded by mostly people who aren't making a wildly huge amount of money, and
Hmm.
you're I don't know, things are just a little bit more kind of, I'm going to use air quotes here, like normal,
Hmm.
um, or average around you, and you've chosen to live in a place that's a little bit more normal, right?
Hmm.
In terms
Hmm.
of like the costs. So yeah, I think people kind of live in their own little worlds, and that's reflected in the choices that they make on what they're willing to pay for college.
It makes my job interesting and fascinating because with my Boston and my
I bet.
Bethesda to Northern Virginia and my Palo Alto families in North Chicago, like that
Hmm.
going to elite schools super super important. Then my Midwest family is like, okay, how are we going to pay for this? Because you're not going to read as someone
Yeah.
who qualifies, but you don't want to pay more than 35,000.
Hmm.
So never a dull day in the world of
Hmm.
admissions. Thanks, Hillary. This was
Yeah,
really
no kidding.
awesome. I really enjoyed it. And I really appreciate your input. Safe travels in Maine.
Yeah,
Did you really break your foot, or
thank
was
you.
that did
Thanks
you
for having
hurt
me
your
back.
foot? Did you hurt your foot, or
I
did you
did.
break it?
No, I broke it. I have two avulsion fractures
Oh,
on my foot. I
oh.
rolled it when I was going up the stairs at the high school where it happened, the principal is a CC dad, and he has a current first year and a current senior. So I was among family when
There
it
you
happened.
go.
But yeah, I mean, is there a more embarrassing place to break your foot than on the front steps of a high school? I don't think so. So I'm in a boot now. I'm icing it actually right this moment, but I'm getting around okay.
Well, heal up. All right. And thank you again.
Thank you.
On Thursday's episode, we start out and you get Andy Strickler Unfiltered. That's right. Andy and I have a discussion about what is it that's keeping chief enrollment officers up at night. It's a two-parter, and you know Andy, he doesn't hold back. You're not going to want to miss what Andy says. Then I'm starting a new series for 6 straight Thursdays where you're going to hear from students. That's right. You're going to hear from 4 students over the next 6 weeks. You're going to hear from 1 very recent college grad. You're going to hear from 2 current college students and 1 high school student. And friends, you probably remember, if you're a regular listener, I asked Lisa if she would talk to several parents about the stress that their student is experiencing or experienced if they just went through that process. And she did a roundtable panel discussion, kind of combining her skills as both a therapist and as a college counselor. I thought she did a fantastic job. So I asked her again if she would do the same thing with 2 students, 1 male, 1 female. Both happen to have the name Sam. One is a senior in high school, and one's a freshman in college. And so you'll be hearing from those 2 students talking about how they handle the stress and the pressure, or how they are handling it, of high, often unrealistic expectations from peers, friends, and relatives. And then we're going to close with Lisa coming back to takes about 7 minutes, just to give some impressions and reflections on her visit recently to Middlebury College. Because we had Sam Prouty, their chief enrollment officer, on not too long ago. It's not a deep dive, but it's just a nice fresh look at what stood out to her when she visited Middlebury College on her New England college trip. Friends, I close with a quote that's almost 80 years old. There are 2 kinds of people: those who think they can and those who think they can't. And both are right. Think about that. It's kind of profound. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionos Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.